I'm here to answer the call.
We have the call log, and first up is John from the Pitch Grid Pod. What parts of NFL defense do you think you could implement into different sports? For example, do you think a good press technique could shore up a basketball defense? I absolutely think that, because if you watch, like, when they do the full court press anyway, it is real tough. But if you can kind of really just find four guys to really just stay on their man, I think a great press coverage. Now, the problem with that is, let's go back to the Arkansas versus High Point game where Darius Acuff couldn't stop Rob Martin and Rob Martin couldn't stop Darius Acuff. So what happens in that situation is that player becomes too fast, and so you need extra help. So then you might have to shift to a zone. But yeah, I mean, I don't see why they couldn't, but I'm also not a basketball, like, I'm not as knowledgeable in basketball as I am football. But now I'll tell you, I don't think, like, in baseball or anything, I mean, obviously it's kind of a pitcher versus hitter, and then that transitions to fielders. But it is a great question, John. Thank you for asking. I'm gonna do some research on this and see. But all right, so the next question is from my man Jason Colenso, the host of Three from Deep. Jason, he wants to know one offensive and one defensive player that will have an immediate impact for the team that drafts them, but I cannot use players that will most likely get drafted in the top 10. That is actually a really great question, because we see it every year. We see every year somebody, late first round, early second round, and they just turn out to be very impactful. Look at last year with Nick Imwari. But so if I had to go an offense and a defensive player outside the top 10, so I'm just going to look at a big board here, just kind of, obviously I know that they won't, it's not guaranteed. Just because it's a big board doesn't mean that that's where they'll get drafted. But one that comes to my mind will be, I'm gonna say Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Oregon, as the defensive player, because I think he's a really great safety. And if he goes to a team like the Vikings, which in my last mock draft I had him going to, at right there in those middle rounds right before we get into the 20s, I think he'd step in and be great. And I think it'll be what that defense needs. So now we got an offensive player, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because most of them it's going to be offensive linemen. So, man, I don't know. Another defensive player, by the way, could be CJ Allen. He's a really great linebacker. Let's see. Offense. I think it's probably going to be a little far fetched a little bit, but Spencer Fanu, the tackle from Utah, which also can play guard. And at the combine, he even said, if I need to, I'll play center. That kind of versatility, that screams instant production. So whether he goes to, like, the Lions or he goes, to the Ravens at 14, I think that kind of versatility can transition and have an immediate impact and make other players want to step up their game on the offensive line. So that is another great one. All right. Next up, we have the Cheesehead and Bear Pod. And they want me to rank the NFC North quarterbacks. Okay, we're going to start bottom. So we're going to start at 4, work our way to 1. I think number 4, it's going to be, I don't know. This is real tough, because there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, it's a ranking, it's how I value. I'm not really sold on Jordan Love, and I've never really been sold on Jordan Love. So I'm going to put him at number 4. And I know that might, be a head scratcher. Now, I will say, if JJ McCarthy ends up becoming the starter, then obviously he falls to 4 by default. At number 3, I am putting a Minnesota quarterback, Kyler Murray, at number 3. And everybody wants to question his, he doesn't want to play football, his love for the game. Maybe it was just a bad experience in Arizona. Maybe he didn't get along with the owner or the coaching staff, or maybe they didn't do enough to develop him in the early years. I don't know. I'm not in that office. I'm not in that facility with them. But maybe it was just a bad experience. I mean, let's look at Sam Darnold. he absolutely stunk in New York. Wasn't that great in Carolina. And then he goes to San Francisco and Minnesota and turns it around, and look what he did to Seattle. He's now a Super Bowl champion. So maybe the situation was just bad, and maybe that's the reason that Kyler Murray just never lived up to the expectations of being the number one overall pick. He's in a new city. From what I hear, he's a major Vikings fan. He has the greatest receiver, one of the greatest receivers in the game today, if not the greatest receiver in the game today, Justin Jefferson. He has an offensive minded coach. And I just think that this is going to be something where he can turn around, and this could be the resurrection of Kyler Murray. Number 2 is going to be Jared Goff. And is he overrated at this point, or is he a system quarterback? What is Jared Goff? Honestly, just by lack of production from the other two, I mean, if the other two was more productive and more selling, I probably would have put Jared Goff at number 3. But the other two didn't really give me a lot to work with. I'm saying Jared Goff is still Jared Goff, and Super Bowl and all this and that with the Rams. But what have you done with the Lions? You haven't. You took them to the playoffs. I get it, but I want to see more from Jared Goff. So that leaves number 1, and that is Caleb Williams. Year 2, he really came out with in the first year with Ben Johnson. He really showed what he can do. So I have him as the number 1 quarterback in the NFC North. And thank you, Mr. Brandon. Thank you. I wish you could have been here. But I understand, doctor's appointment. How did the doctor's appointment go, by the way? So Caleb Williams is number 1, and I think he is going to be great. And I said it when Marcus was on the show last week. I said, I think the pairing of Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams is like the greatest thing to ever happen to Caleb Williams. So right now I have him as the number 1 quarterback for the NFC North. And the final question, this was sent via text. He doesn't really do social media, but he wanted to be a part of the call log. He listens to every episode, every show. He comments, on the shorts a lot. And that is the Matty D, Mr. Matt, coming in with, where does your love for football come from? Like, when did all this start? And that's a great question. And I'm so glad that this one was presented to me. And it started at a young age. I mean, I remember probably 7th grade. Like this is when I feel like I really fully got into it. And it was either 7th or 8th grade, and maybe even 6th. But I just remember, watching and just hearing the excitement on, like, from the announcers and the crowd watching a game, and just, hearing the thud as the pads collided. And of course, growing up, I would spend every Thanksgiving with my aunt and uncle. Like, we would all get together at my aunt and uncle's house, and the tradition was to watch Thanksgiving football. And so that really became where I really started falling in love with the game. Is just like, hey, this is like tradition. This is what we do every year. This is really cool. I didn't want to be a Lions fan because back then they stunk. And I didn't want to be a Cowboys fan because back then they were probably like the most popular team because they were winning Super Bowls. So, and I didn't know any better. So I wasn't a Cowboys fan. I wasn't a Lion, but I enjoyed the game. And I just, from there, I remember the Rams Titans. It's probably the first Super Bowl that I actually like vividly remember, is that Rams Titans and Kevin Dyson just being just so short of a touchdown, and the Rams winning. So that right there, from that moment on. And then of course in 2001, as we all know, when LaDainian Tomlinson got drafted, that's kind of where I really amped up into being a Chargers fan. And that's what led me to being a Chargers fan. But that's how that section and that story of a football fan specific team came about. And I just think that, just when you hear them pad, and back then it was a lot more big time hits. We still have it. Yes, we still have the big hits. But back then, I mean, it was just big boy on big boy. Just, the running backs were bigger. The linemen seemed like they were a lot bigger. Now, we're kind of transitioning to an era of, linemen being like under 300 pounds, both offense and defense. Back then we didn't have that. Everybody was like 300 plus pounds, and it was just boom. So that is kind of where the love started. And I've always, I played football until I hurt my knee as a sophomore in high school. So I've always been around the game of football, and I'm glad, football has been a big part of my life, and it's kind of led me to what I want to do. I do want to take that journey. We just had Dan Scott on, and he was talking about how he enjoys basketball and doing the play by play. So from the football side, I think that would be kind of cool. Or maybe trying to do basketball play by play. That would be kind of cool, especially like if I landed like on the radio like he is. So I definitely think football at a young age, like I think it really had an impact on like how I view things and what I want to do today. So that is where the love comes from, guys. Make sure you're on all the socials: Instagram, X, Facebook, YouTube, wherever. So you can be a part of the call log where I answer your question live. And of course, I'll post this little segment, on YouTube, and probably on YouTube for sure, and maybe Spotify, but definitely I'll be posting it on YouTube. So make sure you're following on all the socials. If you have my number or email, you can also email me if you don't have social media. Answer the call, COLL at gmail.com. That is answerthecall at gmail.com. Send me your question. I'll answer them live, and we'll have a great fan interaction portion of the show as well.